The factory floor was trembling not from bombs, but from defiance. In the freezing winter of 1941, while German panzers clawed toward Moscow, and the Soviet Union seemed to stand on the edge of annihilation, one artillery piece was being assembled in secret. No official approval, no stamped authorization, no committee blessing, just steel, sweat, and stubborn belief. It would become the most produced field gun of the Second World War. It would tear through German armor, shatter infantry assaults, and redefine Soviet artillery doctrine. It would be feared by the Wehrmacht and adored by the Red Army. This is the story of the ZS-3, the gun built without permission, that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. In 1941, the Soviet Union was collapsing under the weight of Operation Barbarossa, Adolf Hitler's massive invasion that unleashed the full fury of the Wehrmacht across the Eastern Front. German panzer divisions rolled forward with terrifying speed. Soviet units were encircled, destroyed, or forced into chaotic retreat. Entire armies vanished in weeks. The Red Army's artillery, once considered formidable, suddenly seemed outdated and vulnerable. Soviet divisional guns lacked mobility, efficiency, and ease of mass production. The existing 76-1 field guns were effective, but too complicated and too slow to manufacture at the speed this war demanded. Inside Factory No. 92 in Gorky, a brilliant and stubborn artillery designer named Vasily Grabin saw the catastrophe unfolding. Grabin understood something crucial. The Soviet Union did not just need a better gun. It needed a gun that could be built faster than Germany could destroy them. Grabin had already contributed to Soviet artillery development, but bureaucracy strangled innovation. Committees delayed approval. Military officials debated specifications endlessly. In wartime, hesitation was death, so Grabin made a decision that would define his legacy. He combined the barrel of the older F-22 USV field gun with the lightweight carriage of an anti-tank gun. It was a radical simplification. Fewer parts, easier assembly, reduced machining time. The result was a weapon lighter, cheaper, and astonishingly effective. He called it the ZS-3, but there was one problem. He never received official authorization to produce it. In Stalin's Soviet Union, producing military equipment without approval could mean arrest, or worse. Yet Grabin believed so deeply in the design that he ordered limited production anyway. The first units rolled off the assembly line quietly. Workers tested them discreetly. Artillery crews admired their simplicity. Then came the moment of truth. The gun was presented to Soviet leadership for evaluation. It fired flawlessly. It proved durable, accurate, and devastating. More importantly, it could be mass-produced at unprecedented speed. Eventually, even the highest authorities, including Joseph Stalin himself, recognized its brilliance. Instead of punishment, Grabin received praise. The ZS-3 was officially approved in 1942, and then the flood began. Factories retooled overnight. Production lines simplified. Workers, many of them women and teenagers, assembled the guns in enormous quantities. The ZS-3 required fewer machining hours than its predecessors. It could be built almost anywhere with industrial capability. By the end of the war, over 100,000 units had been produced. It became the most manufactured field gun of World War II. But production numbers were only half the story. The real test lay on the battlefield, against the unstoppable momentum of the Wehrmacht. When the ZS-3 first entered large-scale combat in 1942, the Eastern Front had become a furnace of destruction. The Wehrmacht had reached the Volga. The city of Stalingrad was burning. Entire Soviet divisions were fighting street by street, factory by factory. In such brutal conditions, artillery had to be mobile, flexible, and deadly. The ZS-3 excelled at all three. Weighing significantly less than comparable field guns, it could be repositioned quickly, even by its own crew. Horses or trucks could tow it. In emergencies, soldiers physically pushed it into firing position. That mobility proved critical in urban warfare, where German tanks attempted rapid breakthroughs. The ZS-3 fired a 76, 2mm shell capable of high, explosive fragmentation and armor-piercing performance. Against early war German tanks like the Panzerkäfer and IV variants, it was highly effective. At close to medium range, it could penetrate frontal armor. German crews quickly learned to respect the low silhouette of the Soviet gun. Concealed in rubble, forests, or snowbanks, ZS-3 crews waited patiently. When panzers advanced, the crack of the 76 mm shell often came too late for the German tanker to react. Its versatility was extraordinary. Unlike specialized anti-tank guns, the ZS-3 could switch roles instantly. One moment it blasted infantry with high explosive rounds. The next, it targeted armored vehicles. It could even provide indirect fire support like a traditional field gun. This adaptability fit Soviet doctrine perfectly. Red Army strategy increasingly relied on massive artillery coordination. Preparatory bombardments flattened German defensive lines before infantry assaults. During the turning point battles of 1942-43, including the Soviet counteroffensive that encircled the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, artillery, including thousands of ZS-3 guns, played a decisive role. Then came the largest tank battle in history, the Battle of Kursk. By 1943, Germany had introduced heavier tanks like the Panther and Tiger. These machines were formidable, boasting thicker armor and powerful guns. On paper, the 76 mm ZS-3 struggled against their frontal plating at long range. But Soviet commanders adapted. Instead of meeting German armor head-on in open fields, they constructed deep defensive belts layered with mines, trenches, and concealed artillery positions. ZS-3 guns were dug in with overlapping fields of fire. Crews aimed for flanks, tracks, and weaker armor sections. At Kursk, thousands of artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously in one of the most devastating barrages of the war. The ground shook. German units advancing into prepared kill zones faced a storm of steel. While the ZS-3 alone did not stop the German offensive, its sheer numbers and integration into Soviet defense made it indispensable. The Wehrmacht had expected quick breakthroughs. Instead, they encountered layered resistance backed by relentless artillery. German soldiers began referring to the Eastern Front as the Red Orchestra, where Soviet guns conducted a constant symphony of destruction. And the ZS-3 was one of its most common instruments. War is not only fought by soldiers, it is fought by factories. Germany possessed advanced engineering and formidable armored vehicles. But the Soviet Union embraced a different philosophy: simplicity, mass production, and ruthless efficiency. The ZS-3 embodied that philosophy better than any other artillery piece. Its design minimized complexity. Components were standardized. Production lines required fewer specialized tools. Even under bombardment and evacuation, Soviet industry could continue manufacturing it. When factories were dismantled and moved east of the Ural Mountains to escape German advance, the ZS-3 went with them. Within months, production resumed. By 1944, the Red Army was no longer retreating. It was advancing relentlessly. Soviet offensives rolled westward through Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and eventually into Germany itself. Wherever the Red Army marched, ZS-3 guns followed. They supported massive offensives like Operation Bagration in 1944, which annihilated German Army Group Center. Soviet artillery superiority became overwhelming. The ZS-3 was not glamorous. It did not have the thick armor of a Tiger tank. It did not inspire fear through size alone. Its power lay in numbers, reliability, and adaptability. By the time Soviet troops reached Berlin in 1945, the ZS-3 had become a symbol of industrial triumph. It had served in every major front. It had trained thousands of artillerymen. It had fired millions of shells, and it had helped turn the tide of the largest land war in history. After the war, the gun remained in service for decades across Eastern Europe, Asia, and beyond. Its influence shaped artillery design worldwide. What began as an unauthorized experiment in a desperate factory became one of the most successful weapon systems ever produced. By 1943, the tide had shifted. After the inferno of Battle of Kursk, the Wehrmacht would never again launch a major strategic offensive in the east. The Red Army seized the initiative, and artillery would lead the way. Among the endless columns of infantry, T-34 tanks, and supply trucks moving westward stood row after row of ZS-3 field guns. Their barrels pointed toward a horizon that had once seemed unreachable. Now it was Germany that was retreating. The great river Dnieper became the next colossal barrier. German forces dug in along its western bank, determined to slow the Soviet advance. The crossings would be bloody. The terrain favored defenders. Machine guns nested in bunkers. Mortars were zeroed in on likely crossing points. Before Soviet infantry could attempt the perilous river assault, artillery had to speak. At dawn, thousands of guns opened fire. The ZS-3, though modest in caliber compared to heavy artillery, was deployed in massive numbers. Its role was not singular devastation, but sustained pressure. High explosive shells rained down on German trenches, supply nodes, and artillery positions. The strength of the ZS-3 lay in its tempo. Crews could fire rapidly, adjust quickly, and relocate when counter-battery fire threatened. German artillery observers found it increasingly difficult to silence Soviet guns. The Red Army had learned to disperse, conceal, and coordinate. The Soviet doctrine of artillery preparation reached new heights in 1944. Before major offensives, hours, sometimes days, of shelling softened enemy lines. Communication cables were severed. Defensive works collapsed. Morale eroded. When Operation Bagration began in June 1944, it was one of the most devastating offensives of the war. German Army Group Center was shattered. Entire divisions were encircled and destroyed. Again, the ZS-3 played its quiet but decisive role. While heavy guns crushed fortified positions, ZS-3 batteries followed advancing infantry closely. They were light enough to cross makeshift bridges, sturdy enough to endure mud, and simple enough to repair in the field. In villages across Belarus, German rearguards attempted to delay the Soviet advance with anti-tank ambushes. Often it was the ZS-3 that answered. Its armor-piercing rounds still posed lethal danger to German medium armor, especially when firing at flanks. The gun's silhouette, low, compact, almost humble, became a common sight in liberated towns. Children stared at it in awe. Soldiers leaned against its carriage, exhausted but triumphant. The weapon that had once defended Moscow now marched toward Warsaw. And still, the factories in the east kept producing more. By early 1945, the Red Army stood at the gates of Germany itself. Snow fell across ruined cities. Columns of refugees clogged roads once dominated by German panzers. The war that began with Operation Barbarossa had come full circle. The ZS-3 was there too. In the Vistula-Oder offensive, Soviet artillery demonstrated overwhelming superiority. Before infantry advanced, artillery barrages rolled forward in carefully timed waves, what Soviet commanders called the creeping barrage. The ZS-3, though not the heaviest gun in the Soviet arsenal, formed the backbone of these formations. Its reliability was legendary. Crews trusted it. Officers understood it. Logistics officers loved it, because it was simple to maintain and feed with ammunition. German defenses inside fortified towns relied heavily on anti-tank guns and improvised strongpoints. Street fighting once again demanded flexibility. Here, the ZS-3 returned to a role it had mastered in Stalingrad direct fire support. In urban combat, artillery crews often wheeled the gun into intersections, aimed down long streets, and fired directly at enemy positions. Buildings shattered under 76-meter impacts. Sniper nests vanished in clouds of brick dust. German armored units, though diminished, still fielded Panthers and Tigers. The ZS-3 could not always penetrate their frontal armor at long range, but in cities, range was shortened. Flanking shots became possible. Coordinated fire from multiple guns could disable even heavy tanks. By April 1945, Soviet forces encircled Berlin. Artillery concentrations reached staggering levels. Thousands of guns were positioned to pound the German capital into submission. Among them were countless ZS-3 pieces, veterans of years of brutal warfare. When the final assault began, the city trembled. Soviet infantry advanced behind curtains of artillery fire. The crack of 76-100 guns echoed between shattered buildings. Smoke obscured entire districts. The ZS-3, born in secrecy and desperation, now fired into the heart of the Third Reich. On May 2, 1945, Berlin fell. Days later, Germany surrendered. The Wehrmacht, once unstoppable, had been overwhelmed not only by tanks and manpower, but by industrial endurance, by weapons that could be produced faster than they could be destroyed. The ZIS-3 symbolized that industrial victory. When the war ended, Europe lay in ruins. But the ZIS-3 endured. Unlike many wartime weapons that faded into obscurity, this gun continued serving for decades. It was exported to Allied nations, integrated into post-war armies, and even saw action in later conflicts across Asia and the Middle East. Its design influenced future artillery development worldwide. Engineers studied its production efficiency. Military planners admired its balance between firepower, mobility, and simplicity. More than 100,000 units had been built, making it the most produced field gun of the war. That number alone tells a story of factories working around the clock, of workers assembling steel in freezing conditions, of a nation mobilized entirely for survival. But its true legacy lies deeper. The ZS-3 represented a shift in warfare philosophy. Germany pursued technical superiority, complex machines engineered to dominate. The Soviet Union embraced scalable strength, equipment designed to be good enough, but built in overwhelming numbers. In the vast spaces of the Eastern Front, that philosophy proved decisive. Vasily Grabin's decision to build the gun without formal permission might have cost him everything. Instead, it helped save a nation. The ZIS-3 stands today in museums and memorials across former Soviet territories. Veterans remembered its sharp report, its recoil kicking dust into the air, the smell of cordite lingering after each shot. It was never glamorous. It was never mythologized like the Tiger tank or the T-34. But it was everywhere. From the defense of Moscow to the ruins of Berlin, from frozen steppe to burning cities, it fired relentlessly. Built without permission. Forged in urgency. Mass-produced into legend. The ZS-3 did not merely overwhelm the Wehrmacht with a single decisive blow. It overwhelmed them with endurance, with repetition, with industrial thunder that never stopped. And in the end, that was enough to win the largest land war in human history. Steel was never meant to change history, but sometimes it does. The ZIS-3 wasn't the biggest gun of World War II. It wasn't the most feared by reputation. It wasn't built with permission. Yet it fired from Moscow to Berlin. While the Wehrmacht relied on engineering superiority, the Soviet Union relied on something far more terrifying: relentless production. Simplicity, endurance, industrial thunder that never stopped, over 100,000 guns, millions of shells, one unstoppable tide. In the end, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a warning. In total war, speed beats bureaucracy, numbers beat perfection, and determination beats fear. If you felt the ground shake with every shot, if you could hear the artillery echo through history, then you already understand why this forgotten gun helped break the Wehrmacht. The comment below: was the ZS-3 the most underrated weapon of WWII? Subscribe for more brutal untold war stories, and turn on notifications, because history doesn't whisper, it roars.